there is a chat feature that I would like to tell you all about today. It's on the bottom of your screen. It's a little speech bubble like a text message. You can press it and ask your questions in advance if you have not done so already. I'm also thinking that you could ask your questions using the chat feature, and then when I read your question, you can expand on what is written instead of raising your hand. Let's get started by doing a brief introduction of yourself and asking your questions if you haven't given them so far. Include the county, state you are from, the number of Braille readers, years of experience, and any other things that you would like to share. To keep things flowing, I will read your introduction and question. When I'm finished, you can elaborate on what you have written. If everybody could do that now, that would be great. So if everybody could do a, thank you. We have Natalie from Toronto. We've got Deborah from Hadley Institute for the Blind. She's a teacher there. We have Anna in Mexico. She's a second language teacher, educator. We have Sue Flaherty, a TVI in Worcester County. She has 4 Braille readers with 17 years of experience in the field. We have Sandy from Little Rock Shoals. We have Charlotte Cushman. She's the manager of the Path to Literacy page. We have Erin Weaver. We have Jane. She runs the Materials Access Center. She's been Brailling for 12 years. She's Brailles for students in Rhode Island. We had Napsia, she's with Hadley. She teaches Braille to sighted learners who support Braille readers in school. We have Nancy Lentz, a TVI in Prince George's County. She's got 2 beginner Braille readers. We have Dina Zorbach. She has a question. Have yet to have an ELL student, but another teacher in our county was just referred to a Spanish-speaking student. We have Anna Diaz. She says, I've got a free English as a second language project for visually impaired learners in southeastern Mexico. Oh, that's interesting. And then somebody did ask a question, is there such thing as Spanish contracted Braille? So thank you, everyone. I am going to go ahead and get started with our first questions from Davina. And I am going to, Davina, ask you to chime in so you could get some dialogue going as well. Don't be afraid to not do that. So your first question is, what is the best approach to teaching Braille to adults with very limited English?
Okay, that's a great question, and I actually have a couple of slides on that. Let me let me go to that. So what I have found that works really well to teach Braille to both students that are K through 12, but also adults, is this kind of blended method that I've come up with that has 3 different stages. So the first one, oh, I can't really read the top. You blend the I am able that Diane Wormsley does with letter instruction. So you start off by teaching vocabulary words that are important to the student. And I hope some of you are familiar with I am able. If you're not, Diane Wormsley is giving our next session in the series. But you have the students select words that they are interested in, that are motivating to them, and then you present it to them. And the research has really shown that students learn a new language best by being well grounded in their language. And so you start with the word, you go to the letter, and then you go to dot location. So it's the opposite of the way we would teach to younger kids, where we start with dot locations, then move on to the letters, and then move on to contractions. So ideally, the TVI or the instructor who's teaching would learn the numbers 1 through 6 in the language of the student, so that you would be able to, show dot locations. And you would provide Braille instruction with some audio instruction as well. So I'm gonna give you an example of what that looks like. So these are flashcards that you can make for your students that are very, very simple to make. And this technique doesn't require you to learn the language, rather learn the same vocabulary words that your student is learning. And so we kind of expect our students to learn English, so it's okay for us to learn some of these words. You can also use, if you don't feel very comfortable speaking the words out loud, you can use Google Translate on your phone, which does a beautiful job of speaking out loud the words. So you would put the students' home language first, and just we want to value the importance of their home language. So you would put that language first, and then you would put the English on the bottom. So let's say they chose dog, right? And I know Spanish, but if you don't know Spanish, you can use an app or whatever. So the first note card there, it says perro. So you would, perro, and get them kind of feeling what that's like. And then you would move on to dog. And it'd be like dog, dog. And then they would kind of know that that is the shape of perro, that is the shape of dog. In the next word, I have an example of a contraction in the English word. And this kind of answers the question that somebody else had about contractions in Spanish. There is contracted Spanish, but very, very few people use it. So it's not even that much taught. Most people use uncontracted Spanish. And so I wouldn't recommend using contracted because nobody hardly uses it. But in the second example, you can see there's the rojo is spelled out and then the red with the contraction in English. So you always want to teach contractions first. You don't want to teach them later. You want to teach them as they come up. And then the last word there we have in Spanish, sonreír, and the I has an accent. So there's a little accent mark. I have a Arabic, French, and Spanish cheat sheet that you can check out on the TVI portal, that we will post a link to it in the chat box. But this is kind of a way to get your students started, where they start recognizing words, and they know what the word is because they get it in their home language, and then they're able to recognize it in their language. And it's a mix of doing the I am able method, which is motivating words, but also blending that with words that are functional, that they're going to have to use if they're adults, in the workplace, if they're students in the classroom, such as bathroom, raising hand, pencil, stuff like that. So it's blended I am able with other another technique. So that's the first stage. The second stage is a rhyming. So once they've gotten vocabulary, the way you really retain language is through rhymes. So you use words learned to make short rhymes. And you teach letter sounds that do not exist in their home language. So you have to do a little bit of research. So for example, in Spanish, the short or lac sounds aren't really present. So for example, JRV, so like in the word very or in the word jar, it's a really difficult phoneme for Spanish speakers to pronounce. And so just getting them used to saying those words. So looking at that word, those words very and jar, let's go to an example. This is what an example would look like of taking those words. So you would first introduce the letter and then introduce the word in Spanish and then in English, Spanish and English, and then at the bottom is a rhyme. So you have the look in the car, there is a head in a jar. And this website Rhyme Zone, you can put in any word and it gives you a million words that rhyme. It gives you phrases, so you don't have to think up yourself of what are the phrases that I'm going to use for rhyming. And rhyming is a way to learn not just phonemes, but kind of the way structure flows in all of the words, like the in and the they kind of all go in there. And then the third kind of phase is fluency. And fluency is really the goal where we want our students to be at. So in order for a student to become proficient in Braille, they have to read an hour a day. And vocabulary building continues to be a part of this. You're continuing to do the vocabulary introduction that we did in phase 1 and the rhyming that we did in phase 2. And then you also provide the text that they're doing in the classroom, but also leveled books where they're at that may not be the same where their peers are reading yet. So if you are in the K through 12, the IEP goals should be written with stage 3 in mind, and stage 1 and 2 would be objectives to get students to stage 3. And then following grade level instructional passages. Reading A through Z is a really great resource that I would highly recommend to use, where you can kind of check where students are at, and then it progresses as they get better at fluency, and it's a way to see them improve instead of just kind of providing texts that aren't as entertaining or as meaningful. I know that was a really long answer to your question. So do we have, did that answer your question?
Hi, I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, those are great tips and strategies. And those resources that you mentioned, is that going to be on, because I'm just doing a phone call right now, is that going to be on a website or something that I could go back on and check?
We can email, what Jackie and I can do is we can email the PowerPoint to everybody who signed up to their email. Okay. Also, I'm really trying to promote our TVI portal, which has all our upcoming professional developments, and then it'll have all the resources from all our webinars as well.
Is that a link that we could?
Yeah, and I'll try to add that to the chat. Oh, yeah, we'll send it to the email as well.
We'll get it to you.
Thank you, Conchita.
Yeah.
So she had asked if you could give any recommendations or suggestions of text materials for reading exercises, but you kind of already did that, I would say. Would that be correct?
The Reading A through Z is a great resource because you can use the same format where you can check what the students are interested in, and then you can pull books based on where they're at. So for students who are very, very new beginners, you can do the AA or the A books, where it's very basic vocabulary, and they can choose the topic. There's lots of different topics of sports and animals and a lot of different stuff. And then once they get better, then you can move them along on the reading. And then Reading A through Z actually has a whole section for English language learners. So they have a bunch of resources that that kind of have some of these vocabulary kind of more defined and stuff. So I would highly recommend Reading A through Z.
Okay, so do you recommend teaching them writing Braille even if spelling English words is a challenge?
Yeah, definitely. So spelling is a challenge for all visually impaired students. And the only way they do it is by practicing and doing it better and doing it more. So the more we can get them to write, the better. And we need them to do all of the things. So the basis of reading and writing is auditory. So getting them to listen to audiobooks is a great thing to do. And accompanying that with, okay, we're introducing the vocabulary, and then we're going to write out the words, the same words they selected that are motivational for them writing it out in Spanish and in English, or whatever other language they speak, so they can write it out. So yeah, it's definitely a good thing to do because they will get better the more they do it. And on the portal, we have not only the English, but we have Yeah, we have Arabic, French, Spanish, and then we have a manual that's world languages in Braille. So you can look up any, by country, you can look up kind of the Braille code people use, and what it, like if they have accents, if they have special characters, and then you can do this system that's on the PowerPoint of like matching it with words that they've done. And some students have never learned Braille in their home language, and that's okay. Where that matters is punctuation. So in a lot of different Braille codes, punctuation is different. So I would say if you're in the United States and you're teaching, if you're teaching Braille and they haven't learned their home language, I would say stick with American, well, with UEB Braille, in terms of punctuation. But for example, I know Maria's on the call, so I would definitely stick to punctuation for what Mexico uses, which is different from the United States. But just be aware that punctuation can be different in different Braille codes. And I wouldn't necessarily teach the punctuation in another code unless they're in that country. I would just teach them UEB punctuation.
All right, is there a way to teach Braille without an interpreter?
Yeah, so I think if you do this system where you have these cards, right? So you don't even have to speak the language. So I'm gonna pull up my Translate app and I'm gonna pretend I don't speak Spanish for a second. And I'm going to type in, I'm gonna type in dog, right? Oh, but I pulled up the wrong app. Okay, there it is. Translate, okay. So I'm gonna put in dog and I'm gonna put this, I don't know if people can see right there. Okay, so I'm gonna put in to speak. Oh, it's not long. Hold on, let me make it louder. Okay. Oh, what is it doing? Okay.
Perro. Perro.
So what I would do is I would do that if I didn't speak the language and then put their hands over the Braille so they know perro. Oh, okay. And then they know, okay, that's what it is. And then I would move them down to the next word. So dog. And then if they're a little confused, oh, dog is
Perro.
perro. And kind of re-emphasize that and get them get them to kind of look at perro, look at dog, and kind of see how they're connected. So I don't think you have to have an interpreter if you use this method where you're starting with the vocabulary. Another thing that's really helpful is when at all possible, having the actual thing. And I know it's hard to have a dog in the classroom, but if you're doing like sonreír, like expressing a smile, or if they choose something more tactile, like a fruit or something, having the items there so they can touch the item, they can read the Braille in their language, and then they can read the Braille in English.
Super. So are you familiar with the individualized meaning center approach to Braille literacy, I am able approach? If so, have you used it with your students? Do you find it beneficial?
Yeah, so that's really the first phase of this technique of teaching Braille to English language learners is using I am able. Because it really looks at the whole word in Braille instead of teaching the student, oh, this is dots 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, they feel the whole word, and that's how sighted readers learn to read. They look at the shape of the word, and they stop sounding out every letter. When you read the word dog on there, you're not going you're going dog because you know the shape of the word in print. And so Braille readers will do the same. And so that's the whole basis of I am able, that if you teach words that are meaningful to the student, they will want to learn them. And sometimes it can be something ridiculous. Like they're like, I just, you know, went to a party and there was a cake, or, you know, it's students. So they will come up with some words that are out there, and it's okay to have those words. It's just something that will excite them and be meaningful to them. But yeah, I very much use I am able in this first phase.
Okay, Davina, do you have anything else you want to add now that you've heard her?
No, everything is great. Thanks for answering all my questions. It's really helpful. Thank you.
Super. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next question then. This is from Wendy, and Wendy is actually a new instructional assistant, and she's currently working with a pre-K student. She's noticed that some of her classmates look and listen to books, and she was wondering if you felt that this was helpful to promote literacy, even though the children are just learning letters and can't read the books themselves. And then, is this a technique that would be beneficial for a student that was visually impaired if they were to have Braille books with audio recordings of the books?
Yeah, so, oh, sorry, were you done?
And were there any pros and cons to this technique?
Okay, yeah, so it's a great technique to use audio along with Braille, because audio is really a form of literacy for sighted students. They learn, we're recommending for sighted students that parents read to them every night because it really does improve their literacy skills. And so it's the same for our blind students. So having paired, you know, a Braille book with an audio book, and sometimes I think of all the stages a kid is in, right? So they're in a classroom and they're just starting Braille, but they're reading a material in the classroom that may be more advanced. So that would be a perfect opportunity to give them the audio version and have them follow along in Braille, even if they're, you know, they're not to the level yet where they can read that Braille material independently. It's really, really helpful for their literacy skills. Another thing I highly recommend is getting the parents of the students to read to them in their native language at home once a book at night. So I highly recommend, you know, talk to them and tell them how important it is for their literacy, because their home language really is the foundation of them acquiring other language. And when they have a really good foundation in their home language and they understand the grammar and the syntax, then they will more easily pick up English. And so sometimes we kind of ignore that part of it, and we're just like, just pick up English as fast as you can. And so there's I actually think I have a slide of that. So in language acquisition, there's something called the silent or pre-production period. So this is a time where students are just taking in information and they're not speaking. And sometimes we have a lot of pressure where we tell them, oh, I'm gonna say the word tree. Okay, your turn, say the word tree. And the thing is, they're not ready for that. They're just in the pre-production phase where they're just taking in information and trying in their brain to put it in the right spots and figure out what it means. And so if we force them to kind of speak the words, it can mess up that system of them trying to reorganize it in their brain. So the audio is great. And just looking at that pre-production period where they're just taking in information. And then after they do that for a while, then they'll start to kind of speak on their own. And it can be a little hard when we're, you know, trying to get them to speak and trying to get them to read and trying to get them to be a part of their classroom, but we need to give them that time. So yeah, audio input is great.
She'd asked too, is there another technique for teaching reading? And in parentheses, Braille print that is preferred? If so, what and why?
So there's lots of ways of teaching reading. And I guess it depends on, like, are they in school? Are they adults? But a lot of school districts have their own reading instruction system. And so you want to figure out what it is that they're using in the classroom. And so let's say you have a 7th grader who isn't necessarily going through, you know, reading instruction. You still want to find out, you know, what the 1st graders, what the 2nd graders, what the kindergartners are doing for reading. For example, some people use dibbles in combination with leveled books. So I'm a huge fan of leveled books, the reading A through Z, where you introduce, you know, basic reading and then it progresses as you go on. But there isn't, that I know of, a way of teaching reading to English language learners. This is something that I have come up with through experience, through looking at best practices that exist in the field, looking at research, and kind of seeing what works best. But as far as I'm concerned, I haven't seen any other technique that I know people are doing a bunch of stuff, but I haven't seen anything like published or anything about teaching English language learners with visual impairments. But there's a lot of reading instruction packages out there just for sighted students.
Okay, so this is from Colleen. She was wondering what resources were available to help teach Spanish, the parents of Spanish speakers. And I'm sorry, that might have not sounded correct, but you understand what I'm trying to say. How to use BARD, Read2Go, Learning Ally.
Mm-hmm. So there's, I have some resources on here, but actually these are more for teachers. Different websites have different resources. So Read2Go has a parent manual in Spanish. They also have, they also have like a letter explaining to Spanish speaking parents about what the services and what those are like. So each, like some organizations do a great job of putting all their materials in Spanish and really providing parents with that information, and others not so much. So I definitely see the need for that because it doesn't really exist as much. I know NFB Newsline has been putting up a lot of stuff in Spanish. If you subscribe, it's kind of done state by state. If you follow the Texas page of NFB Newsline, they have a lot of information for Spanish speaking parents. So they have like instructions for NFB Newsline, instructions for Bookshare. They have articles. So they're a really great resource. They've done a good job of kind of getting all this information together.
And then what resources are available for Spanish speakers in terms of learning Braille, for like the parents to learn Braille?
Mm-hmm. So, you know, I know there's someone on here from Hadley, and I don't know if they can answer that question because I honestly have not found good resources for Spanish speaking parents to learn Braille. What I have done is I've provided them with like a cheat sheet that's the alphabet. And then like some punctuation, and then it's the same in English as it is in Spanish, the alphabet at least, not the punctuation. And there's some additional punctuation in Spanish due to accents. So I provide them with a cheat sheet and then kind of have them review that. And I'll do the thing where it's like the cookie sheet that has like the six dots, and then you can put the different things in there. But I have not found a lot of great resources for teaching parents Braille in Spanish, but maybe someone on this call might have some more information about that.
Okay, I'm putting that out there to the group. Is anyone in the chat, and make sure I have the question correct, is anyone aware of any resources for teaching Braille in Spanish? Is that how I want to phrase that?
Yeah, for parents.
For parents.
Yeah.
Teaching Braille to parents.
Yeah.
Who speak Spanish. Is anyone aware of any resources for teaching Braille to parents who speak Spanish? Correct?
Yeah.
There we go.
And like I mentioned, we do have the Spanish Braille cheat sheet. So you can use that to kind of guide parents, and it has all the symbols on there and the alphabet and the accents. But other than that, I haven't really found much.
Okay, does anybody have any questions that they want to put out there? I have all the ones that people sent me in advance. If you want to take a quick minute and jot down a question and using the chat feature, that would be great. If you don't have any, I know Conchita has a wonderful presentation that she can share with you that you can, feel free to ask questions as we go throughout. So I'll give everybody just a quick minute. Here's one. Are there accessible Spanish or French online dictionaries that the student themselves could use?
You know, that's a great, so what I do for everything is Google Translate, because it's accessible. So your students, if they have an iPad, they can download it on their iPad, and they can do not just a word, but they can do a whole phrase. If they're using a laptop, they can do it on their laptop in Google Chrome. And you can save it as a bookmark, or you can just type into Google Chrome, translate blank into blank, and it can be in Spanish as well. You can say like traducir, you know, árbol inglés, or you can write it in Spanish. So Google Translate is a really great tool. It used to be not so great, but I think the more people use it, the better the algorithms figure it out. So most of the time, it might miss like a weird punctuation thing, but in general, it's really good, and it's an easy way for students to pull up any word that they're not sure about.
Okay, that looks like that was my only question. Oh, she also asks, is there a screen reader also?
Yeah, so if your student is using JAWS, I mean, depending on what they're using, but if they're using JAWS, it works with JAWS. If you are using like a Google Chrome, or it works with the Google Chrome voice feature, which I forget what it's called right now. It works perfectly with VoiceOver on the iPhone or the iPad, so it's pretty accessible.
I have another question from Nancy. Do you think it's worthwhile for an ELL student who is blind and intellectually disabled to receive ELL services? The student's in 9th grade. She's been told our intellectually disabled students aren't eligible for ELL.
I'm not sure where you heard that, because that should not be the case at all. A student should receive ELL services, even if they have an intellectual disability or whatever their other disabilities are. They should be receiving ELL services. And kind of what determines that is the home survey that parents have to fill out to enroll their kids in school. But yeah, that should not be a reason to keep them from services. I actually, Jackie and I were actually in a school not too long ago that works with students with multiple disabilities, and there's an ELL teacher there that's you know, working with our blind students and figuring out what to do with them. And so no, it should not be a barrier to keep them from receiving services. That's actually not, it's not any regulation or any law or anything, no.
Somebody had put Chromebox and a question mark.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, Chromebox. Yeah, for the Google. Yeah, it works with Google Translate.
All right, I'm going to go ahead then and let you take it away on your PowerPoint.
Okay, go ahead and let me know if there's a question along the way. So I feel like we've already kind of done some of this. So some objectives I have is just kind of learning some principles of language acquisition and how they relate to our students, and then learning instructional strategies for teaching Braille and some resources. So the numbers, in 2014-2015, about 9.4% of students in public schools were English language learners. That number is definitely higher now, but if we go with that 9.4 number in Maryland, based on the numbers, we have about 180 English language learners with visual impairments. And so kind of putting that into perspective, I'm hearing more and more from a lot of educators, we're getting more English language learners. And so it's definitely a need that we need to kind of know how to work with our students and get better resources. So 80% of English language learners are Spanish speakers, but there are more than 100 different language types that are spoken throughout the country. But definitely Spanish is the largest one. And many are fully bilingual, with, you know, Spanish at home, English at school, but it doesn't mean that they're not English language learners at all. So a couple of neuro myths about English language learners. So this one is kind of sometimes a shocker to TVIs, but there's no evidence that learning styles exist. So there's no such thing as a visual learner, auditory learner, kinesthetic learner. And the more research they've done on neuroscience, the more this proves to be true. It doesn't mean you don't like it. You know, I could like doing things more visually or like doing things more auditorily, but your brain is not divided to work like that. Your brain is divided to use all of the information around you to get a better picture. And so the more information we can give our students, the better. And children who are blind do have visual representation in their brains. And so again, when we're looking at reading instruction, it's important for them to read contractions right away, because the way they learn the word is the way the shape gets in their brain. So if we're teaching a word uncontracted and then we switch to contracted, it's really going to slow them down, because it's a totally different word to students now. And then ELL students do not learn best by immersion. And this has been shown over and over to be the case through research. So it's a combination of having them, you know, listen to the language, having them, you know, do these different strategies, but also have a good basis in their home language that's really going to support them. And a little bit about academic language versus social language. So academic is, you know, everything we use at school, learning math, necessary for success in school, but also beyond school. And then their social home language is what they do at home. And as educators, being able to validate both of those languages to students is really important, because it creates in them like an idea of self-worth and that their home language is important. And it will help them better connect with you and better be able to learn English. Okay, so some language acquisition. Okay, so language acquisition is dependent on home language. So it's something I've been talking about. So our first language will always form the basis of new language acquisition, especially in terms of phonemes. The way our mouth, it kind of has muscle memory. So our muscles develop in the memory of our first language. And then when we learn other languages that have other phonemes, it's a struggle because we have to teach our mouth to go in a different way. Like for example, English has the TH sound, that doesn't really exist in Spanish. And so a lot of English language learners have difficulty. So it's important to teach those phonemes and with a lot of repetition that they don't necessarily have. And then I can't read the top because I'm trying, oh, there we go. Okay, language acquisition and speech vary. So this is what I was talking about, where a student needs to listen first to a lot of information, and then speech will come later. And sometimes it's difficult for us to kind of acknowledge that, but it's different parts of the brain that deal with speech and with language acquisition. So we need to just kind of be mindful of that and understand that it's okay for students to kind of listen and be quiet for a little while. And then when they feel a little more comfortable, then begin to speak. Okay, so these are the stages of language acquisition. So the first one is silent or pre-production. So this is where they're kind of listening, they're trying to understand, they're trying to fit in grammar and syntax and vocabulary with the current language that they already are fluent in. And then after there, they go to early production where they may be saying 1 or 2 word responses. And then they go to speech emergence. And this is where they have phrases or short sentences. And sometimes speech emergence gets confused with fluency, and it can be very dangerous because we assume, oh, this student is speaking so well, they are just having full conversations, and so they are fluent. That doesn't necessarily translate over into how they're acquiring vocabulary and how they're acquiring information. So like research that's been done has shown that students who start, let's say, 3rd grade being an English language learner and progress through the years, they're not really past the understanding on a more complex level until about 11th grade. And so just being aware that it takes time and encouraging them to speak and encouraging them to read, but still supporting them, in, especially in vocabulary where they may have read the whole book, but there's, you know, several words that they didn't understand, and they don't know. They don't know that they got the wrong meaning to those words, because like we all do, we all look at vocabulary based on context, and they maybe got the wrong context for the vocabulary. So making sure we go through with them. And then we have intermediate fluency, where it's longer sentences, fewer grammatical errors. They're really being able to put verbs and nouns in the right order. And then after that, we have fluency. And true fluency can take about 10 years. And so a child may appear fluent, but that may not necessarily be the case. So creating meaning out of realness, language is connected to meaning. So for a child that is blind, meaning comes about with tangible objects. And sometimes what we tend to do is we tend to give them a plastic figure of a dog to show them what a dog is. That really means nothing, because it's not, the plastic figures aren't real objects. So it's much as possible trying to provide that real objects. And then again, immersion by itself can cause misunderstanding. Concept development accompanying first language is best due to the time it takes to acquire a second language. And they're going to pick it up because they are listening to it constantly, they're having to interact with it constantly. And then with your support, being able to build that vocabulary that they need to read and have, you know, be fluent. Okay, so we went over the 3 stages a little bit. I'm not going to go over that again. Okay, so some strategies to use that are not what we've already talked about. So using the student's home language, we went over a little bit. Developing a list of functional words and translating those into the home language. So kind of in the phase 1 where we have the note cards and we have the words in their language and then the words in English, doing that with motivational words, but also functional words that they're going to be using in the classroom, that they're going to be maybe using in their English class, in their science class. And then the next one is have students read books or listen to books in native language to gain comprehension. So this is important, you know, like I said, having their parents read to them in their home language at home is really important. Having them maybe read a text in their home language first, or listen to it in audio and then do it in English. It really helps set the foundation for the vocabulary, for the idea, for comprehension, and then they're able to better acquire it in English. Having real objects as much as possible, giving students time to observe and capture language before we make them speak. Whenever possible, teaching them hands-on experiences, and speaking slowly and clearly. A thing we do a lot is we use a lot of idioms, and I didn't realize how many idioms we use until I had an English language learner, and I was like, oh my gosh. I would tell him, you know, I just ran up here, and he was like, you ran? And I was like, well, that's not exactly, or like, oh, it's, you know, we use so many idioms in our English language, and trying to minimize those when we're working with an English language learner, because they will take it literally. And then once they're in a more advanced phase where they can understand more vocabulary, being able to introduce those idioms to them and explain, okay, this is what it means, even though it says, you know, I ran up here, or, you know, I can't think of one off the top of my head now, but trying to explain to them what they actually mean. So there's something called a total physical response that educators use with sighted students that works really well with blind students, which is whenever you're teaching a new concept, when you're teaching vocabulary, modeling with having them physically be involved in the object. So having them do hand movements, having them move a certain way. And the idea is that when they connect an idea with a movement or something, they will be able to remember that better. So also, you know, doing your research on their language. And I know it can be a lot where you're like, I have so many kids, I can't look up every language. But you know, your student is learning English. So you don't have to learn their language, but at least, you know, kind of do some of the vocabulary words or some of the phonemes that don't exist in their language that we can teach them. when a student says something incorrectly or their grammar is off, trying to rephrase what they said instead of correct will really help them, because sometimes if they're corrected right away, then they'll stop talking, and then it'll put them back again into the pre-production phase. And then a really good technique to do is have students take notes on the lessons that they've done. And depending where they're at, it can be, they can take notes on an audio, on a little handheld, recorder. They can take notes on their laptop. They can take notes on a Braille writer, and review the notes with them. Because what I have found is that when I read my students' notes, I realize, oh, this is where they're lacking the information, or okay, they've really mastered this concept, so we can move on to something else. And it helps them put down the information in a way that's meaningful to them. So having them take notes is a really, really good technique. AFB has some guidelines on English language learners. And so they have matched listening activities to students' English proficiency level. So we talked a little bit about that. Beginning instruction with functional vocabulary that is needed for best communication. So, teaching them some functional words like bathroom and recess or something. Learn basic differences between students' native language and English. We talked about that. Teaching key phrases that will help the student solicit clarification, like please repeat, or I don't understand, or can you explain more, are really important. And develop lessons around environmental sounds. So kind of what sounds are in the school building, and then what do they, what are they connected to? And then teaching key questions. And then some best practices that are really useful with ELLs. When you can, you don't have to, it's not mandated, but when you can, inviting ELL teachers to IEP meetings. Sometimes they have, some information that can be really useful. Try and use the home language, like I said, the Translate app, ask in Siri. Talk to the family about some of the words that the student might be really familiar with, especially if it's a student with multiple disabilities who may not necessarily know the words himself. Family members might be able to tell you, they really like to play with this, or they really like to do such activities. So that can be really helpful. And then try to collaborate with the ELL teacher as much as possible to try to see what are the things you all can work together on. So just remembering that language acquisition, it is a process. So it's going to take time, and it's going to take sensitivity, and just kind of remembering that and trying to do, what's best for your students. So that is, I have some resources. So Paths to Literacy has some good resources on ELL learners. The TSBVI, Second Language Link, has a lot of resources. There's the do's and don'ts of teaching ELLs. Family Connect is a great resource. Actually, this answers a question from another person had earlier. They have 99.9% of their stuff in Spanish. So if you find an article that you're like, this is a great article, it's focused for parents. So Family Connect, you can go to the article, find it, and then they have a link that says Spanish version. 99.9% of their stuff is in Spanish. So it's a great resource for parents about a million topics. If you're working on O&M, if you're working on expanded core, if you're working on whatever, you can kind of send the article home with the parents, and it's a great resource. There's a Maryland Technical Assistance Bulletin for Maryland teachers that is kind of more specifics on working with ELL students and what are the do's and don'ts. A great website is Colorín Colorado. They are the place that they've brought all of the research together in one place for English language learners, and said these are the best techniques and this is what works. And so kind of, there's so many things out there, and so they really kind of narrow down, like, this is evidence-based, this is what works, these are examples. So I would definitely check out their website. And then, of course, our TVI Maryland portal. We have a lot of professional developments and other resources. You can check out all our Braille cheat sheets in Spanish, French, Arabic, and then any other world language. So yeah. I don't know if we have any other questions.
I did have a request for the presentation. Oh, and I just got another question. I got a request for the presentation. I went ahead and posted the TVI portal. If anybody has any issues with that website, please let me know. And then I got a question. How would you approach setting up an ELL Braille reader using how would you approach setting up an ELL Braille using student with sighted English reading peer buddy activity? Excuse me. Do you want me to reread that?
Yeah, no, I get what they're trying to say. That's great. That's really, really great. What I try to do is trying to pair the print with Braille. So pairing is a great technique to use in the classroom. So a lot of classrooms will do where they divide up students and have them read to each other. So have the student follow along in Braille while their peer reads to them the phrase, and then have it be on the Braille sheet, have it be in print too. And I mean, I guess it depends on the embosser you have, but you can also kind of, transcribe it yourself. But having the Braille reader follow along and then having their peer read it, and then they're going along and they can work together in that way. Yeah, that's a great technique to use.
Is there anyone else? We got a thank you, a lot of great tips, tricks, and resources. Got another thank you. I can see I definitely need to get audiobooks to my student.
And the reading A through Z, they pair the books with audio. So if you download a book and say, your student is reading at level B, which is very, very beginner, you can give them the Braille version, and then you can give them the audio because it includes it in the reading A through Z. And we're not talking about large print readers, but you can also take the books and make them for large print readers where they have different versions. So you can they have a version in A through Z books where you can do them for coloring. And what I have found is for low vision readers, the coloring works really well because they've now outlined all of the pictures instead of all the colorful stuff that's really visually distracting. So you can take the books that are meant for coloring and have those for the large print students who may struggle with visual clutter and it just really does a great job of outlining all the pictures, so then they can look at the pictures, but then also have the large print books.
All right, it's 3:56. So lots of positive feedback and praise for this presentation. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Oh, we just got something here. This is from Joanne. She thought it might also be good to touch on the difference in second language acquisition between adult and children.
Yes.
We'll save that one. Save that one for the next one. But like I said, Maryland School for the Blind's YouTube page, you can check out our previous Braille Literacy Lives if you're interested. And our next one's going to be May 20th from 3 to 4 p.m. with Diane Wormsley. She's going to be focusing on I Am Able. So thank you everyone very, very much.
Thank you all.
And Conchita, if you could just hang on real quick.
Yeah.
Thank you. Actually, you know what? I'm going to end the meeting and I'll catch up with you later.
Okay, perfect.
Any questions? Thank you. It's taken a couple minutes. I think people have their phones on mute. So.